if they're members of the committee, while applications in the ward are being considered and voted on by the committee. Right, okay, let's go. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence and substitutions. Kim.
Sorry, it's me, not Kim. Yep, Councillor Jane Austen and Councillor Lawton.
I think Councillor Spencer's away too, isn't he? Spencer as well, I think, actually. No.
No, Chair, no.
Minutes of the last meeting. Can we confirm the minutes of the last meeting held on the 26th of July and published on the council's website? Everybody agreed? Thank you. Declarations of interest. Kim, have there been any declarations of interest, or if any committee members wish to announce any declarations of interest now?
Yep, just one from Councillor Morris.
By members of the public. Kim.
None received.
Questions from members.
None received.
Is the government guidance or legislation in the last meeting? Beth?
No, Chair.
Well, which brings us on to the main items of tonight's agenda. And the first item is an application to direct public speaking, and that's WA 2022-02194, a land at Hurst Farm, Chapel Lane, Godalming, GU85UHU. And the office, which is, I'll just read that, is a hybrid application, including full planning application for the erection of 216 dwellings, a new farm shop, use class E, change of use of existing farm shop building to rural business hub, use class E, provision of public open space, new sports pitches and associated infrastructure, landscaping, drainage arrangements, parking, and formation of new access points following the demolition of existing buildings. An application with all matters reserved except access for the erection of a new health hub following demolition of the existing black barn at land at Hurst Farm, Chapel Lane, Godalming, GU85UE. And it's Kate to present. Kate.
Thank you very much, Chair. So before I begin the presentation, I'd just like to present to you an update. This was published earlier today, and there are also hard copies in the chamber if members wish to take them. The first matter on the update sheet is in relation to the recommendation. So we have added something to the recommendation, so I'll just read out the new recommendation in full so that everyone can be clear of that. The recommendation is that delegated authority is granted to the executive head of planning development, subject to prior consultation with the Secretary of State, completion of a legal agreement with heads of terms as set out in the agenda, additional conditions and any minor amendments to recommended conditions. And moving back to the update sheet, we are proposing to make some minor amendments to the wording of conditions under the delegated authority. There are also 3 additional conditions which I've included here on the update sheet. They relate to highways matters. The first is that the access onto the Chapel Lane Portsmouth Road junction should be provided prior to the wording is that no more than 75 dwellings shall be occupied before that's provided. The second additional condition is in relation to the various junction improvements that the applicant is proposing to make in consultation with the Highway Authority. And the condition requires that no more than 110 dwellings to be occupied prior to those junction improvements being provided. The 110 dwellings trigger is what is recommended to us by the Highway Authority, but it's obviously something members have the opportunity to discuss if they wish. And then the final additional condition is in relation to electric vehicle charging points. There's a note that we've received an additional consultation response from Whitley Parish Council with regards to the playing pitches, and also a note with regards to 3 additional representations which we've received, which relate to the safety of access to the village hall and the proposed use of the playing pitches, visibility displays to Esching Lane, and the implications of the adjacent Sang. We've also received an additional email in relation to the SANG and contributions to an adjacent site. But in this instance, the developer hasn't identified an alternative SANG arrangement which is acceptable. So with that said, if I move now to the slides we have in front of us on the screen, I have here a site plan which shows the extent of the application. To the bottom of the page, here is the Portsmouth Road with the site going around Meadow Close here. The main access to the site would be in close proximity to the existing access to the existing Secrets Farm shop on Chapel Lane, which is just here, with Ishing Lane to the top of the site here. And the site crosses the boundary between Waverley and Guildford. So this, I suppose, outrigger within the south site outline here is within Guildford area, and the remainder is within Waverley area. So moving now to photos of the site, we can see here some photos of the existing Secrets Farm shop. The image to the left is of the existing junction into the farm shop area with the buildings you can see there on Chapel Lane. And the image to the right is one of a number of buildings which cluster together to form the existing farm shop. And this part of the site is within a conservation area. And moving now to look further into the site, beyond the existing farm shop buildings, there is an existing fairly substantial car park which serves a farm shop with large glass houses beyond that, which you can just see on the image to the left there in the background. There are also quite a significant number of ancillary industrial type buildings which serve the farm shop use, which you can see in the image to the right there. And then looking across the site here, as you can see, it's farmland. It grows a variety of fruit, vegetables, flowers, etc. currently. And there are a number of large glass houses, both next to the existing car park and in further parts of the site. And here are just some further images of the farmland and the additional glass houses, some of which you can see there. The image to the right is looking towards Portsmouth Road, and the buildings you can just see the corner of here are the back of properties onto Meadow Close. And the image here to the left looks slightly closer at those properties to Meadow Close. So it's the site adjoins the garden amenity areas of those dwellings. And the part of the site immediately adjacent to Meadow Close is currently, as you can see here, grassed over. Moving to the opposite end of the site, this view is along Ishing Lane. This part of the site isn't within Waverley's geographical extent, it's within Guildford Borough Council's area. But as you can see, it's a rural lane and there's an existing SANG area and car park that allows walking opportunities already on Ishing Lane. And moving now to the policy context of the site, it's particularly relevant that I refer members to policy DS14, which is within local plan part 2. The site was previously within Greenbelt and has now been removed from the Greenbelt. This policy DS14 allocates the site for a mixed use development, including 177 dwellings and associated facilities, including the relocation of the existing farm shop and all of their existing retail businesses, the creation of an area of public realm to create a centre for the village and community of Milford, the provision of a rural business centre and the creation of new sports pitch facilities. The policy also requires that the scheme meets a number of different considerations, so I'll just quickly outline those. It's to provide connectivity within the village, to conserve and enhance the setting of heritage assets, to protect the area around the ponds, which currently contributes to the local character to provide an appropriate landscape buffer to the north of the site and to achieve satisfactory access and provide sustainable travel measures alongside publicly open space and SANG, which is required as the site is within the Wealden Heaths Special Protection Area. Moving now to the applicant's proposals then within the context of that policy, we can see here the overall master plan for the site, and I'll just go through the various elements which are being proposed. So it's proposed that a new farm shop would be sited in this southern section of the site here, adjacent to Meadow Close, with its own access from Portsmouth Road, which would also link through into the development, and landscaping and a significant parking area to the front, alongside a route which connects the site through to other parts of the site.
Is Councillor Rubini?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I can hear what you're saying, but I can't actually see the map very well. The lights on it or whatever it is, there's very little detail you can see.
We shall fix it, hopefully.
Oh, yeah, I'll just wait a few minutes. Is that better? Thank you. And if we sort of move westwards from where they're proposing the farm shop, you can see that the existing ponds areas would be retained, and they'd be now utilised to serve as part of the sustainable urban drainage system for the development. Whilst there is a route which is currently used by the public around the ponds, it's not a formal right of way, but the application would allow public access over that area. The area of land to the west of Meadow Close would be retained and planted with trees as open space. And then moving further westwards, the building in yellow we can see here would be a new healthcare hub. This is the only element of the application which is submitted in outline, so we don't have final details of that area at this stage, but the applicant has allowed a sufficient area of land there to provide the requisite parking for a healthcare facility of that size. And then to the south of that healthcare hub, around the area where the existing farm shop buildings are, the applicant is proposing to provide a new area of public realm with seating, and some changes to the junction of Portsmouth Road and Chapel Lane, which we will see in further detail further in the presentation. The existing single-storey black barn within the farm shop complex would be retained as is, and converted to provide a rural business centre. We don't have the final details in terms of layout for that space at this stage. They would be conditioned, but it would be within a business use. And in addition to that, around this area as well, if I can just get the relevant part, here we go. In this area, 10 parking spaces would be provided, which would be accessible for people wishing to park to use local shops. And then moving into the main residential part of the development, the 216 dwellings would be provided in perimeter blocks, with units facing back to back, and relevant amenity space for each unit. There would be 3 blocks of, I believe, 9 flats each. So the majority of the buildings would be single family dwelling houses. The applicant would also provide a really quite large area of green space to the centre of the site. And within that area, they're also looking to provide a neighbourhood area of play, so a fairly significant equipped play space. The applicant's also looking effectively to connect up the green space to be provided around the ponds and the central green space, and the green space provided beyond the site at the top of the site, by providing these green corridors here between the dwellings, where there would be pedestrian walkways, which would also be planted up to provide small corridors to allow wildlife to traverse the site, in effect. And the final element for me to describe is this part of the site. Within this area, the applicant is proposing to provide 2 junior playing pitches alongside appropriate parking for that, and a toilet block facility. That would have a car access from Eashing Lane, but that wouldn't connect through to the housing element. And the whole of the playing pitches area proposed is within Guildford Borough Council's jurisdiction. So moving now to look at more details of the application. Here is the access and movement plan with all the key routes highlighted. You'll see to the top of the page there's a yellow arrow at the top of the site. This indicates a proposed cycle and pedestrian link through out of the site across the applicant's land, joining up to Franklin Way, which would then connect on to the proposed Godalming Greenway beyond that. There'd also be a key route from, particularly for pedestrian traffic, from the Portsmouth Road entrance near to the farm shop, linking through to the new healthcare hub and business centre area. And here we can see the landscaping plan, which just highlights the extent of the green spaces to be provided. And this is a detail of the new village hub area and the works around the junction to Portsmouth Road and Chapel Lane. So effectively, this area of green space here with low level planting would be added. A double two-directional level of traffic would be maintained on all of the roads surrounding, and a raised table would be installed at Portsmouth Road. And the area of public realm would be provided here and would include a seating area. And this plan also shows the detail of those 10 parking spaces which would be provided here, and include 2 blue badge spaces, and they would be to, as I said, to serve people using the local shops. And this plan is a building heights plan, so with the peach colour showing development of 2 stories, and the 3 orange dots indicating the flatted buildings, which will be slightly higher at 2.5 stories. And this plan is only an indicative plan, so it's not a firm plan at this stage, but this is taken from the transport assessment and details the route of the proposed cycle and pedestrian link through from the site to Franklin Way to connect into the Godalming Greenway. So the site is in this area here, and it would run with Eashing Lane here, and it would effectively run to the edge of the existing farm holding, joining into Franklin Way here. And moving to the proposed dwellings, here are a number of the street scenes proposed. The housing element of the scheme is in full detail, so it's not just outlined, so we can consider all matters of appearance, layout, scale, etc. As you can see, the properties have been designed to meet the Surrey vernacular with a fairly traditional design approach. And here are the elevations of the new proposed farm shop, which you'll see has been designed in such a way as to respond to a traditional farm building aesthetic. And that's the end of the detail with regards to the proposal. I just thought I would outline some key material considerations, and members obviously have the report which goes through, you know, all of the different considerations, but there are just some which I thought would be useful to highlight officer position. In terms of the land uses proposed, the application is acceptable and does meet the requirements of the policy in terms of the different mix of uses. The application is, however, a cross-boundary application. So the playing pitches, which policy requires to be provided, wouldn't be provided in Waverley area. So in that respect, the proposal does represent a departure from the allocation. However, the applicant has proposed with this application an alternative way of providing those playing pitches, other than being within the Waverley area, to provide them immediately adjacent to the site within the Guildford Borough Council area. And given that that's proposed, officers consider that departure to be acceptable. Equally, the SANG is required to offset the recreational impacts of the development on the special protection area, and that isn't proposed as part of the current application. It is, however, proposed to be an application is, however, before Guildford Borough Council for a change of use to a publicly accessible natural green space. And officers have been working with officers at Guildford to ensure that that application coordinates with this, and a condition is recommended to ensure that that SANG comes forward. The proposal also departs from the allocation in that refers quite specifically to the provision of 177 dwellings, and 216 are proposed, so that number is obviously slightly higher. However, the officer view is because that number seems to be reasonably accommodated on the site in terms of the density being appropriate within the local area. Officers consider that increase beyond the allocated number to be acceptable in this instance. In terms of the provision of affordable housing, this represents quite a significant public benefit of the scheme. 65 affordable dwellings are proposed, and 33 of those would be of a social rent tenure, which is the tenure which Waverley's evidence base indicates is most in demand. So that represents a very key public benefit of the scheme. In terms of the heritage impacts, some less than substantial harm has been identified in terms of the setting of Turnpike Cottage. However, this harm must be given great weight in the planning balance. However, it is considered that the public benefits of the scheme outweigh that harm. In terms of the living conditions provided for future residents, these are considered to be acceptable. In terms of the impact on existing surrounding residential occupiers, these are also considered to be acceptable. Part of the site to the northwest, the dwellings would come within, I believe, 20 metres back to back of the adjoining dwellings, which is very slightly under the standard guidance of 21 metres within our residential extensions SPD. However, this is considered acceptable given the density of the area and the already existing levels of mutual overlooking in that location. In terms of transportation considerations, the application is subject to a transport assessment and has been reviewed in detail by the Highway Authority, who've concluded that with the various measures proposed but through both condition and planning obligations, that the scheme would have no adverse impact on the highway and would provide suitable transportation conditions. And finally, in terms of sustainability, the development would provide a 10% biodiversity net gain, which is obviously a significant public benefit of the scheme, and would also meet our policy requirements with regards to the dwelling emission rates. And that is everything, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate. Quite a complex application, really, in that matter. Right, we have a number of public speakers. The first one being an Amy Green. Amy Green, she or is she online?
I don't believe she's turned up, Chairman.
Ah, we don't have Amy Green. No, all right. Okay, I'll move on to next public speaker is John Secret. That's followed by Joseph Hayes. John, if you come forward, please, and you have 4 minutes from when you start speaking. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Chairman and members of the Council. My name is John Secret. I'm co-owner of FA Secret Limited, Hurst Farm, Milford, and landowner of this application. We're a fourth generation family business founded by my late grandfather in 1908, with the purchase of 20 acres of horticultural land in Kew. After several moves, including land at Twickenham and a 300-acre market garden in Walton-on-Thames, he finally moved the family business to Milford in 1937. By then, my grandfather was widely regarded as the pinnacle of horticultural achievement within the industry. And he went on to develop the Milford site with many innovative techniques and growing methods. The farm thrived, testament to his skills, acumen, and hard work. In the 1960s, with the difficulties posed by overproduction of fresh produce, competition from supermarkets, and the consequence of low prices, growers had to diversify to keep up with the evolving market. In 1972, Secret was supported by Waverley Council in granting consent to open one of the very first garden centres in the country, followed by the opening of the farm shop in 1979. We would not be here today putting forward this current application were it not for your support with these two consents all those years ago. The scheme before you this evening carries the heritage, the history, the traditions of a unique family business into the future. By granting consent, Secrets will continue to support the local community with a new farm shop, which is at the heart of this proposal. It will provide a more modern and efficient retail facility to provide for the future generations. The Secrets Farm will continue to grow crops for local and London markets, where our fresh and comprehensive range of fruit and vegetables have such an appeal to the best restaurants in the city. We have worked hard on this scheme to ensure that the residential development plans also reflect our own company's vision, including the style of housing, retaining the ponds and green space. Other representatives here tonight can provide details of the provision of the affordable homes, the enhancement of the traffic management, development of the rural hub for local businesses, and the creation of sports pitches for young people. We've also accommodated requests by our parish council to have an access point to the residential development through the new farm shop site. Land has been offered to the GP practice for a new modern health centre for residents of Milford and Whitley, adding to the positive impact this proposal will have on the local community. This scheme has twice been overwhelmingly endorsed by local residents as a preferred site for the provision of extra housing in Milford and Whitley. And we are grateful for the support and backing of our parish council, who have guided and encouraged us throughout this whole process. I'm here this evening asking you to support your officer's recommendation and grant planning permission for this scheme. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secret. Thank you. Right, so the next vote is Whitley Parish Council. Whitley Parish Council.
Once again, Chairman, I understand from Councillor Gale that Whitley Council no longer wish to speak.
Well, Councillor Gale, you have 4 minutes now and 4 minutes after the debate, if you wish to speak. I'm sure you do.
Thank you, Chairman. It's my go, is it? Okay, well, first of all, I'd like to thank the officers who've worked on this particular application for such a long time now, and they've been very accommodating to councillors through the whole journey. As you can imagine, a development of this size in a rural village can cause some worries to local people, and I think that is only to be expected. Some people don't like change, and I'm sure when my house was built in 1940, there was some opposition. But if it's done with care and understanding to the people in the area, the much needed homes do settle in. In the case of Hurst Farm, of course, locally residents were not in favour of building on Greenbelt and losing valuable farmland. But in the Whitley neighbourhood plan, it was the preferred site. From the initial plans seen by Waverley and the Whitley and Milford Parish councillors, many changes have actually taken place. One notable change, which is actually thanks to the Secret family and the Whitley neighbourhood plan, the entrance and exit onto the A3100, the Milford to Godalming Main Road. This reduces the impact on the mini roundabout at Church Road. And with the intended highways improvements of crossings, this will be a great help. There are parking spaces for the village to use and a much needed new healthcare centre coming along. I am very pleased to see that all the homes will have personal outside space, which is something we learned about during COVID, and the affordable homes have been well mixed in with the open market homes. At a briefing recently, I brought forward some queries, and I wonder if officers can tonight let me know if these have been taken into account with the conditions. The first being the car club. I would like to see a restriction on where these cars can park. I wouldn't like to see them taking up the 10 allocated spaces for community. In condition 54 on the update sheet, I see that we now have no more than 75 residential dwellings. I'd like that to be reduced, if it was at all possible, to 50, because I think the impact on Milford is mostly to do with highways. And we also have condition 55 on the update sheet, where we've now got a reduction. I'd like to see a reduction on there to at least 75 or 50, because 110 dwellings actually inhabited before we get all the arrangements through Milford for traffic, I think would be just a bit too far. The joint use footway from Milford to Arons Hill is a welcome addition. And can we now be assured that the exit to Arons Hill is now secured in land ownership? The new healthcare centre, which will form part of the new entrance and public realm, I did ask that, is it possible we can set a time limit on when this comes forward? It will be a major development in that area, and I don't think anyone would want to see a building site sitting there for too long. The ponds are a welcome addition to this because it gives people green and open spaces. But from my knowledge, these are not entirely spring fed or part of a watercourse. And during summer months, they have been topped up from a borehole. And I'd like to make sure there's some agreement that this can carry on. We don't want to see too large holes in the ground. Overall, I think the layout of the housing and the new paths, the sang and the public realm is as good as we can get or expect, and better than we have seen elsewhere locally. I'd like to see this move forward. Now, it's been a long time coming. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, we also have two other ward councillors, but Councillor Law, I believe you represent this ward. Do you want to just speak? And Councillor Sullivan, I believe you, do you wish to speak? Since you arrived late, you can't participate in the debate, but you have an opportunity to have 4
No,
minutes now.
I know I can't vote. Am I okay to speak?
Thank you very much. Okay, well, you've asked some questions. Can we answer Councillor Gill's questions first?
Yes.
Phoebe, you would like to speak?
Yes,
Oh,
if that's
sorry.
okay. I'll be very quick, don't worry. So yeah, as everyone knows, that this application has been on the books for a while now, and I've obviously followed it quite closely. I do want to have a little shout out to all the parties involved, including the Milford and Whitley Parish Council, who have worked tirelessly to get this over the line, or up to committee stage at least. I personally agree that the overall harms to the scheme are balanced against the benefits, of which I think are quite significant. And I think the final application is what I would say most residents would want, and the actual development looks good, including obviously the public realm, biodiversity net gain, the traffic calming measures, and obviously the new health hub. So yeah, I'd like to congratulate the team to be able to get this a long way from the original design. Regarding concerns, if I can talk briefly about them now at this stage, if that's okay. I have very few. I still have concerns surrounding increased traffic on Eashing Lane. The traffic on that road is actually the reason for my lateness, so apologies everyone. I'd like to also maybe ask, or maybe officers could get me a bit more detail on the SIL contribution. Apologies if I missed it on the report, but if there's anything that can be said on that. And obviously, like Councillor Gale, I'd like to ensure that the doctor's surgery is built and possibly up and running in a timely manner. And if I could get answers on that, I'd be happy to support the application as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Right. Kate, do you want to answer all those questions first? We'll members' question.
Certainly, Chair, thank you. In terms of the car club bays, there was a question around that. The applicant is proposing a number of visitor parking spaces, which would be near to the central green area. So it's anticipated that a final solution will involve some of those spaces being dedicated to the car club vehicles, but this, you know, it's only indicative at this stage. It's not confirmed until the legal agreement details are submitted. In terms of the question around the boreholes, it's not proposed, and the ponds, it's not proposed that they would be fed by the boreholes in the future, but they would form part of the sustainable urban drainage system for the scheme. So they would effectively have water from throughout the development draining into them. Where are we? I'm just looking at the questions here because there are a number there. In terms of the traffic to Eashing Lane, the application has been assessed in detail by the Highway Authority, who have been looking particularly at the implications around Eashing Lane, and it's technically the case is that there wouldn't be any harm to Eashing Lane in terms of traffic flows with the various interventions that are proposed at the junctions. In terms of the SIL contribution, I am afraid I don't have that figure before me at this stage. However, it is the case that a significant extent of new floor space is proposed, and it would be chargeable on all of the private market dwellings and the new floor space, alongside a discount for the existing floor space in line with the regulations. Thank you.
First of all, can we have any member questions when we're moving to the debate? Anybody member questions on the presentation? Councillor Coburn.
I'm not going to moan about leaps and laps. I'm quite like this leap for this application because it's big. No, my question was on the biodiversity net gain. How is that going to be measured? I mean, how on earth are we ever going to know that it works? Because it's a very easy phrase to say. I like the percentages, we know what you're supposed to get, but how on earth do you monitor it to know that it's been a success? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Coburn. So the applicant has submitted a report which details quite specifically how they would be meeting that. It's proposed that that would be secured by condition. If you can just bear with me a minute, I can find that condition. So I can give you the detailed wording there.
Maybe if I can just come in. So in terms of the measure at this stage, it's a baseline data point, and then it's we would expect as part of a condition a ongoing management plan, but also potentially we'd look at securing through the 106 a monitoring regime, because you've got to demonstrate in perpetuity, and you'd normally look to measure that uplift over the 30-year period that's the in perpetuity period for BNG, monitoring periods of maybe 1 to 5, and then after 5, maybe 10, 15, 20, 25. So that would normally be done through a submission from the managing the developer stroke the management company going forward, by an ecologist demonstrating how that biodiversity net gain uplift has been achieved, and then we would take our own advice to confirm whether or not we agree with those measures.
I'm most intrigued by this BNG just generally. I mean, if we get 8.5, you know, do we tell them they've got to knock a couple of houses down and plant more trees? I mean, this, you know, I'm very much for this application. I'm not trying to be awkward, but the BNG just really baffles me when we have a large development like this. Yes, we've got lots of green spaces, but we're taking over a green space to build this. You know, and when people say, well, we'll plant half a dozen trees, that's great, but you're knocking down half a dozen trees in another place. And I really don't understand how the base data can give you a figure that we can then monitor accurately. I mean, is it worth doing is what I'm basically trying to say. You know, I'm all for green measures, I'm all for planting, all of that. But, you know, we have this strange idea that somehow we can, you know, really measure biodiversity to such a degree. And I just really don't understand it. I mean, I hope it works.
So I'm not an ecologist, so I'm not going to begin to go into the depths of the DEFRA work, the matrix, et cetera, because I wouldn't be doing justice. And also we would probably be here till this time tomorrow. So it's an evolving position. DEFRA under the Environment Bill Now Act have been working on this for probably 7 or 8 years. It's obviously something new in local authorities. Some local authorities have been requiring biodiversity net gain sort of 2-3 years ago, just because of where their local plans were and decisions they may have made as councils. So it is a very new measure. In terms of your question, which is probably the more fundamental question without going into the details this evening for the committee, is does it work and how can we monitor it? Yes, it does. If we found that on the monitoring provisions that they were achieving less than 10%, and noting that if you start with a site that's got relatively high biodiversity net gain, which you know, this site well may have, then obviously your starting point's much higher than maybe a site that's I don't know, former car park. Then if you found that it was falling below the 10%, then you would work with the management company to look at what measures you may be able to put in. And it can be sometimes simple things like sowing wild wildflowers that attracts bees. It could be things like swift boxes or bat boxes, or so there are lots of measures that you can put in place relatively quickly to improve the biodiversity net gain within a development. And certainly there's no expectation we'd ever be in a position where we'd say a house couldn't be occupied or had to be knocked down because you'd fallen below the 10%. But I'm sure, members, that we are going to talk in a lot more detail about biodiversity net gain as that comes to the forefront of the Environment Act, and perhaps it will be a subject for a Pacific training session, sort of maybe after Christmas.
Councillor Rubini, a question is it of the technical presentation?
I was just going to ask a question on the presentation. When I look through this, I can see the Surrey Police made a comment. What I haven't seen though is whether it went to the secured by design officer or architectural liaison officer. And on an estate of this size, I would have expected them to make comments, looking at it as whether it was a porous site or whether in fact the footways and pathways are substantial. So I'd just like to know whether you actually consulted them.
Yes, we did. So the comments reported from Surrey Police are from the secured by design officer at Surrey, and there is a recommended condition in line with his comments.
Okay, so the only one I saw in here for Surrey Police was the impact of PROWs on page 17.
If you bear with me, I can pull up the relevant condition and look over. So recommended condition 35 refers to secured by design accreditation for the residential element and commercial elements, and the park mark for the doctor's surgery car park.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? Oh, yes.
Yeah, it's just this is for Claire, I think. Just following on from Carol Coburn's point regarding biodiversity. Just as a general point, how does Waverley ensure that the planting plan or that particular condition that relates to the planting and therefore the biodiversity planting and so on. How does it ensure that it's been completed and correctly done, please?
So members, what we need to be doing as a planning authority is actually sort of monitoring some of these big sites to make sure that the conditions are not only complied with, but actually in terms of discharge, but in terms of what happens on the ground, particularly with landscaping, where sometimes you find, particularly on larger sites, and I'm not suggesting in any way this would happen here, that the planting happens, landscape architects come on site, do a grand job of putting in trees, and then we have periods such as today, maybe where those trees aren't watered, and then, you know, the sort of year 2 or year 3, that planting fails. So how we ensure is that we actually sort of proactively monitor those conditions, and particularly around landscaping, to ensure that it does succeed, not just in the first year, but in subsequent years.
Councillor Rivers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to speak to the variation on the numbers of residential units, 177 to 216, that officers consider to be of benefit. And I'd like to agree that, as Waverley needs more homes. Thank you.
Any more questions? Or shall we move into debate? Shall we move into debate? Right, anybody want to speak on the application? Councillor Coburn.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This, as we know, goes back a long way, as do I, and I've been slightly involved in this, believe it or not, talking to parish councils and going to various exhibitions. And I am just delighted with it, that it's come eventually, and also that the parish town councillors have actually managed to achieve so many of the smaller, important items that make this a more acceptable application. I don't think the change in number is particularly material. I mean, I know it's, I can do the maths, but you know, in terms of the effect it's going to have, I think it is acceptable. And I just, you know, hope that we have more applications where we actually sit down and listen to each other and hammer things out. I know it takes a long time, and the officers must be so relieved that eventually it's come in, but you know, it's worth it if what you get at the end of it is all the benefits that you can clearly see. You know, I mean, we're all opposed to CalPAT planning. We're fed up to the back teeth of just plonking the same thing on every town and every village, and this doesn't do this. It considers its where it sits, it considers the benefits. Well, it's talked to the community and worked out what the benefits are. So yes, like everybody else, I'd rather leave a green space. But given that we need homes, I think this could turn into a really lovely place to live. I am a little bit worried about ponds, and we've got our own experience in Farnham of life buoys around ponds and all sorts of things that we'd rather not see in development. But empty holes are almost as bad as very full holes with life buoys, as far as I can see. But hopefully this will actually work. And naturally, public green space will be of great benefit to the new occupiers and also the existing occupiers. I hope the parking spaces maintain the shops, extend the life of the shops, and certainly boost the shops. I hope the actual numbers of people living in the houses will do that as well. I hope the village hall gets more money because there's more people living there. There are benefits, as we know, to housing. And as I say, given that we need them, I think this is actually a very good application, and I'm delighted to support the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Any other councillor wish to speak on the? No. Well, I just like to make a point. Councillor Gale did make a point of mentioning that she'd like to see a reduction in the number of vehicles from 75 to 15 one condition and 110 to 75, 110 to 75 in the other condition. Is there general support amongst councillors for that?
So in terms of that, then obviously committee, it's for you to decide whether or not you are happy with the conditions and the wording of the conditions. The highway evidence and therefore the advice and the number in the condition is that the need for those works isn't triggered until the 110th dwelling. But notwithstanding that, if you as a planning committee are not happy with that number, it's within your gift to agree a revised number.
Does anybody wish to speak on that? Or can we take that as part of the revised proposal? Right, we come to the ward councillors again. Councillor Gale. Anyone should just wrap?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think everybody seems to be quite happy with what they're looking at tonight, because yes, as Councillor Coburn said, there's been a lot of work put into this to try and get something that doesn't look like a development of lots of sticky boxes. I would have liked to have seen those conditions come down in number, because the biggest problem in Milford is going to be highways. It's already oversubscribed with vehicles, and we have to bear in mind as well that somewhere in maybe 50 years' time, the Milford Golf Course might pop up, which is even more vehicles coming into Milford. So really and truly, we really do need those highway conditions coming in sooner rather than later. Other than that, thank you, Chairman, for listening to us tonight.
Councillor Lord, do you want to say anything? Okay, and Councillor Sullivan?
No, nothing more from me, thank you.
Right. Right. And I'd like to move to, we can move to the recommendations. And the recommendations will be with amendments, because nobody's actually opposed it, that we reduce the number of vehicles from 75 to 50 for the first condition, and 110 to 75. The second, the recommendation A is that delegated authority be granted to the executive head of planning development to grant planning permission subject to conditions, including minor amendments to recommended conditions, and the completion of a legal agreement securing affordable housing, healthcare hub, off-site pedestrian cycleway, sustainable transport provisions, open space, suds and play space maintenance, and subject to planning permission being granted by Guildford Borough Council for the playing pitches. And the recommendation B is that in the event that the legal agreement required under recommendation A is not forthcoming within 6 months of the committee resolution, permission be granted. Yes.
Sorry, Chair, that was the earlier recommendation. Can we just get the updated recommendation in front of you? Yeah, that was remiss of us to not put that in front of you.
Yes, okay, right, okay. Right, I'll start again. That the delegated authority be granted to the executive head of planning development, subject to prior consultation with the Secretary of State, completion of a legal agreement with the heads of terms as set out as on the agenda, additional conditions and any minor amendments to recommended conditions, right?
That's correct, Chair. You've managed to read my very scribbly writing.
Yeah, all right. Good. Okay. Well, it's electronic voting time again. Those in favour of those conditions, please press the green button, and against the red button, and if you abstain, the yellow button. Yes. Okay. Let's. Are we going? Right. Oh, not yet. Not yet. No. Technical problem. Oh, there we go. Oh, are we? I haven't got any lights. Are we going to do the old-fashioned way as well? No, not lighting up. Should we do the old-fashioned way? Oh, that way. Okay. Special lights now. Thank you. Result.
So, Councillor White. Too late, okay.
Okay. Yes. Don't worry. Yes, result.
So as you can see, that's 10-4,
Right.
0 abstention and 0 against. So
Right,
the
that is
recommendation
granted.
is carried.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Can we move on now, please? The next item. Right, the next application is. That one's gone out. I know, no. East. 10,000 just gone out. 10,000 just gone out. Right, I see it's Councillor Weldon. Oh, no, he's there. All right, okay. The next one is WA 2023, it's slightly amended here. 00905 Waco East Union Road, Farnham, GU9 7PT. An application under Regulation 3 for external alterations to existing building for use of the GP surgery and pharmacy. Alterations include erection of entrance, canopy, alterations to elevations, installation of roofers and PV panels to roof, and alterations to existing car park, Waco East Union Road, Farnham, GU9 7PT. And it's yes, it's going to present. Beth or Philippa? Philippa is going to present the.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. Apologies for the slight technical issue there. So this application proposes external alterations to the existing building to facilitate its use as a GP surgery and pharmacy. The application is before you as the council is the applicant. I draw members' attention to the update sheet, which just made a number of corrections to some typos and removed conditions 4 and 5, which upon further consideration were not considered necessary, relevant to the development or reasonable given the nature of the proposal. As set out in the officer reports, there would be no change of use from office to doctor surgery, as both fall within Class E of the use class order. So this evening, members, you're asked to consider the external alterations only. So the application site is located on the corner of the junction of South Street and Union Road in the town centre of Farnham. Some photographs of the site. So this is the site. The building is this brick building here. So this is the view of the building from South Street. These are the photographs as you enter Wayside from South Street. This is photographs of the Wayside and the bridge properties which are adjacent to the building. Further photographs of Wayside. And these are the photographs from Union Road. Photographs of the undercroft, which is obviously underneath the building. Okay, in terms of the what's proposed, the proposed alterations to the elevations, what is proposed is the erection of an entrance canopy So on the left-hand side, you've got the existing elevations, and on the right-hand side is the proposed. So there'll be an entrance canopy there. Another of sort of minor alterations to add a few doors, and the installation of louvers and PV panels on the roof. I'll show you a picture of that in a moment. So these are the existing elevations on the left and proposed on the right. So very, very minor alterations proposed here. And here is the roof plan, which shows the proposed PV panels. And this is just the proposed site plan. So main matters of consideration here are the visual impact. So officers are of the view that the proposed alterations to the elevations are minor and would not harm the appearance of the host building or the street scene. The PV panels would be visible in longer range views, but would not be visible from the street level, and therefore not considered to result in any visual harm. And in terms of the residential amenity, the amendments are considered minor in scale and would not result in harm to residential amenity of neighbouring occupiers. So the recommendation before you is to approve the application subject to conditions 1 to 3. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Right, we have one public speaker on this. Well, it says Terence Lewis, but it's not Terence Lewis. Is it Kim on Zoom? Yeah, it's not Terence Lewis though, is it? Hello, good evening, Libby. You have 4 minutes to start when you start speaking. Thank you.
Neighbours' objections from the bridge, right of way for access. The main access is by means of a single lane road between the proposed surgery pharmacy building and the bridge block of flats. The bridge and wayside own this road. Registry title SY 470173, with Way Court West, the solicitor's office, having permitted rights of way for access. Way Court East appears to have no right of way for access to their main buildings or specifically to either of the 2 allocated disabled parking spaces or to the ambulance parking space, which should be repositioned to the front of the building. We are disinclined to grant permissive rights of way for this usage because the disabled bays are likely to be misused, people waiting to use them would block the road, and the ambulances cannot turn around without backing into our car parking area. Road usage. CHA states the development should not prejudice highway safety nor cause inconvenience to other highway users. The access road is narrow, one-way traffic only, and so is easily prone to congestion, with a real possibility of vehicles queuing back up into South Street in both directions, especially with the increased car and large vehicle usage. Parking, loading and turning. Staff car parking spaces at the surgery pharmacy will be protected by a barrier to prevent use by the public, but our car parking spaces immediately opposite will have no such protection. Unauthorised parking is already an issue with neighbours' parking spots being blocked. This will make a bad situation much worse. CHA states there will be no patient drop-off facility at the site, and like the existing GP facility, patients will use public car parking when travelling by car. There is persistent dropping off of patients outside the existing surgery, where there is at least room to do so. The temptation for people to drop off patients, especially if they have mobility issues, will be irresistible, as anyone who has had to take an infirm or frail relative to visit their GP can attest. Our access road is very narrow, there is no proper pavement, making it dangerous to walk to the surgery pharmacy from this side of the building, especially for those with mobility issues. CHA state the need for vehicles to turn so that they may enter and leave the site in forward gear. Almost all vehicles will be unable to exit without reversing and turning around using our private parking land. Our cars and building structures will be at serious risk of damage from such manoeuvres, especially by large delivery vehicles. We've had several instances of such damage already. If more than one large vehicle enters the access road, there will be no space at the surgery pharmacy for them to park, let alone turn around, and there will be no option but for the second vehicle to reverse back into South Street. Unwanted visitors will arrive at the staff barrier with only 2 alternatives, either to reverse back into South Street or to turn in our private car parking area. Noise and disturbance. This is likely to be significant for residents during the 35-week construction period. Once built, several of the bridge apartments will overlook the staff car parking barrier and be exposed to the noise of the barrier. One of the apartment's balconies is approximately 10 metres away. Signage could control parking. Regular daily deliveries for the surgery and pharmacy will increase noise levels for residents from vans and lorries, especially if they have reversing alarms, slamming doors and noisy trolleys, particularly if out of normal hours. This would be especially detrimental for residents who work from their flats. Increase in traffic. CHA states it is satisfied the proposal will not result in significant increase in vehicle movements when compared with existing office usage. It is likely there will be at least twice daily fleet of delivery vehicles for both the surgery and the pharmacy, most likely by truck, so much more traffic and much larger vehicles than would normally be for office usage. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much. Right. Questions to the presentation. Any questions first before we move into debate? Debate then. Debate. And which councillor? Councillor Rubini.
Thank you, Chair. I just want a bit of clarification. On page 300, under highways and parking, which you've just heard from the lady, it says quite clearly, it should be noted that planning permission is not required to use the building as a doctor's surgery, and accordingly, there can be no objection to any traffic associated with the doctor's surgery. I've not actually seen that anywhere before. So do we take that in? I mean, is that absolutely correct from Surrey?
Thank you, councillor. Yes, that's correct.
So in fact, we can't query any parking or anything else to do with that surgery?
Yeah, the application is to consider the alterations to the building as the change of use is permitted within that use class. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for clarification.
Just Lee? Put shite in that, aren't we? No. All right. I suppose we have to move to the recommendation then, don't we? The recommendation is that subject to conditions, permission be granted. And again, electronic voting, please. If you're in favour, press the green button. If you're against, press the red button. And if you stay in the middle button. Thank you.
Yes.
So again, that's 10 for and 0 abstention.
12. Don't think those.
Oh yes.
Don't think those.
12 votes for, 0 against and 0 abstention. So the recommendation is carried.
Thank you very much. A land at Woodside Park, Cottage Hall Lane, Godalming, and erection of a building comprising of 12 flats together with associated parking, bicycle store and bin store at Woodside Park, Cottage Hall Lane, Godalming. And again, it is Philippa to present. Philippa.
Thank you, Chair. Hello again, members. So this application proposes the erection of a building comprising 12 flats with associated parking, bicycle store and bin store, and the flats would be 100% affordable. Just as a verbal update, whilst I was sat over there earlier, I've noticed a mistake that I made in drafting this, in that I have, in condition 7, requested a construction transport management plan, and in 9 have said it should be in accordance with the one submitted. And I think for completeness, we should remove condition 9 and stick with condition 7 so that the County Highway Authority can consider the plan in detail. So yes, condition 9 would be removed. Okay, turning to the application site. So the application site is located on the south side of Cathedral Lane and forms part of the larger Woodside Park site, which is currently under development to provide 97 residential units and the retention of the existing ambulance station. This portion of the site formerly contained an office building known as Bargate House, which was demolished as part of the extant outline and reserve matters permissions. The site is currently free of development pending the determination of this application. Return to some site photographs. So this is a photograph of the site looking from Castershaw Lane, so looking south into the site. This building here is Sandford Mews, which is residential. And this sort of green one that you can see the edge of is the ambulance station. The area shown in this photograph is currently used for construction traffic, but this is the site where the building would be located. This is looking south from the application site towards the residential development that is underway. This is looking north towards Castershaw Lane, which is here, and then the Sandford Mews residential development is there. Again, looking south into the site, that shows the ambulance station, which would be retained. You'll note that the parking here is existing, and that is the location of the parking for the development we're considering today. These photographs look towards Sandford Mews again from the edge of the site on Castershaw Lane. These again show the edge of the parking, which would be used for the site and Sandford Mews. And then this is a historic image, but I thought it was useful to demonstrate the building that was there prior to its demolition. So this is from 2016. So it shows the proximity of that building to the residential units there at Sandford Mews. And again, another historic image showing that building in place prior to its demolition. So planning history. So this application site forms part of a strategic site subject to policy SS8 of the local plan part 1. This policy allocated the wider site suitable for around 100 dwellings and employment and community uses. Permission was latterly granted for 97 dwellings, including 17 affordable units, as well as a community and commercial building. And this permission, owing to the sort of development that's underway, is extant. As I say, it's at an advanced stage, the rest of the construction. If I just highlight to you, if I can find the cursor. So this is the ambulance station, which is remaining. And then this is the location of the building that was approved for a commercial and community use. And as I've said, that building hasn't been constructed, but we will come on to that. So yeah, the current application seeks to provide an alternative building to the one that was approved and would have a residential use. So these are the elevations of the building which has permission. So this is the community and office building. And those are the floor plans. So the ground floor was due to be a nursery, and the first and second floors would be office use. So in November, the Eastern Area Committee considered a similar application to today, which was also for 12 affordable units of a similar scale and form. At the committee meeting, members resolved to refuse that application for 2 reasons. One in relation to the loss of the approved community and commercial building, and the other was in relation to the cramped design and lack of amenity space and landscaping. So these are the elevations of the scheme that was refused in November. We'll turn to the current proposal. So this is the proposed block plan. So Castershaw Lane is here at the top, the ambulance station is here, and the wider site falls outside of the red line here. So as I say, the application proposes the erection of 12 affordable housing units in the form of 6 1-beds and 6 2-beds. There's a dedicated bin store proposed, which is here. Car parking is proposed largely in the location of the existing parking, as well as a space here and here, 3 spaces here. Cycle storage is proposed here, and you'll see that there's landscaping proposed around the site as shown on the plan. So turning to the proposed elevations, this is the northern elevation, which would face Castershaw Lane, albeit some distance away. And here we can see that the applicant has put forward much more detailed in both the sort of elevational treatment and the materials. So there is a bit more detailing to be provided, which officers consider gives a bit more interest to the appearance of the building. The southern elevations, this is the rear, which faces up into the trees behind Woodside Park. Again, a bit more detailing and material variation there. This is the eastern side. So the front of the building is here. And this is the western side. So just as a bit of comparison, because what we're asking members to consider today is the acceptability of the proposed building in relation to what already has permission. So it has permission for a community and office use, and we're asking you to consider whether 12 affordable units are acceptable. So I've just shown, I appreciate that the previous plans are black and white, which is difficult to compare, but you will see, and you'll remember the previous slide that showed they were all just one brick type with very little detailing. And the proposal now has different materials, more detailing. It's got balconies to some of the flats and a lot more landscaping around it. So that's the front and rear elevations, and then these are the side elevations. So yeah, just more detailing and material variation there. And turning to the proposed floor plans, as I said, there were 6 one-bed, 6 two-bed units across 3 floors. So we're turning to the main matters of consideration. So the key consideration for this application is whether the applicant has overcome the previous reasons for refusal for the scheme considered in November, which relate to the proposed design and the loss of the permitted community and office building. So in terms of the loss of the approved building, again, I would note it hasn't been constructed, so that is a key consideration here. So the application proposes to replace the permitted community and office building with 12 affordable units. In the previous application considered in November, members were not sort of satisfied with the justification provided for the loss of the approved building. Again, it's important to recognise it's not been constructed and there is no requirement for the applicant to construct that building. As set out in some detail in the officer report, since the previous refusal, the applicant has worked to provide additional information, including a 3rd iteration of the independent reports by chartered surveyors. They've also provided additional and updated information with regard to early years provision, which is based on data and statistics from government publications. Whilst officers acknowledge the extant permission and consented scheme would provide commercial and community space, the consented building has not been developed yet. Thus, it's a material consideration that no existing businesses would be displaced by the proposed development, noting the applicant's case that other suitable office or alternative uses are readily available in the immediate and local area. It's clear that whilst historically the Woodside Park development comprised a mix of office, industrial and warehouse buildings, is largely surrounded by residential uses, with the exception of the existing ambulance station, which would be retained. As such, it would not be out of character for a residential use to occupy this space. Officers consider that whilst the proposal would see a departure from strategic policy SS8 of Local Plan Part 1, it would accord with policies EE2 and ICS1 of Local Plan Part 1. It would also meet a clear identified need for residential accommodation within the borough, with the added benefit of providing 12 affordable residential units, which are of a particularly pressing need in the borough. On this basis, officers consider the proposal acceptable. In terms of housing mix and affordable housing, the provision of 12 affordable units secured by legal agreement is considered to be a significant benefit of the proposal. The housing enabling team are satisfied that the proposal to provide the 12 units at reduced affordable rent capped at 70% of the local market rent, including service charges, is acceptable. In terms of the design, the proposed building is similar in scale, bulk and mass to the extant community building. However, since the previous refusal, the applicant has revised the design to include greater material variation and detailing. Whilst unexciting, the proposed building design is considered to provide greater interest and be in keeping with the wider Woodside Park development, which is considered to be a benefit over the extant permission. In terms of standard of accommodation, the proposed bedroom sizes and internal floor areas would meet and exceed the technical guidance. All habitable rooms would be provided with sufficient light and outlook. several units are provided with private balconies. Whilst limited private amenity spaces provided, a modest but usable communal outdoor space would be provided, as well as publicly accessible wooded areas and open undeveloped areas, including the lake, which were secured via the main Woodside Park permission. A leap is also provided as part of the wider permission, and the applicant has confirmed that access to these areas is secured via their contractual arrangements with the wider site developer. In terms of the residential amenity impacts, it's recognised that the introduction of a building in this location would have a greater sense of presence owing to the current undeveloped nature of the site. However, it's a material consideration that the community office building could be constructed owing to the extant nature of the permission. Officers are satisfied that the separation distances, to the neighbouring properties are sufficient to prevent an overbearing presence or a loss of light or outlook. It's noted that the building would feature first and second floor windows which would face residential dwelling Rosedale to the east and Sandford Mews to the north. But officers acknowledge that whilst views from a commercial building may be different to those of a residential property in terms of timings, it's a material consideration that the approved scheme could be implemented. In light of the above, officers consider the proposal would not result in material harm over and above the approved extant scheme. And finally, in terms of parking, the application would provide 16 off-street parking spaces, which is a shortfall of 2 in relation to Waverley's guidance. However, the site's in a highly sustainable location in close proximity to services and facilities. There are also 47 unallocated spaces within the wider Woodside Park development. Officers and Highway Authority consider this to be acceptable. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Philippa. Right, questions on the presentation, anybody before we... Debate. Oh, Alan, Councillor Morrison.
I just note the last meeting on this, back in November, when Councillor Follows actually asked about the affordable housing. Under questioning, it seemed that the affordable housing wasn't quite what it was actually stated or implied to have stated. Have we actually got proper clarification this time that it is absolutely going to be social housing? It's not a private landlord, it's going to a housing association. We definitely got clarification there. And then the other thing I'd just like to ask is on the lack of amenity space last time. They're now saying that they've had discussions with Crest Nicholson and that they can use their facilities. Again, is that legally, cast in stone?
Thank you. I will ask you to repeat the second part of that question in a moment, I'm afraid, because I just was seeking clarification. But the developer is in discussions for Waverley to take this forward to be developed by the council. If you wouldn't mind repeating the second bit, so thank you.
Yeah, the second question was, last time we sort of rejected it partly because of lack of amenities, and there was just no sort of outside amenity space. I see they have tried to amend that, but they've also got an agreement, I believe now, with Crest Nicholson that they can actually use some of the car park spaces that they've got, and 2, that they can actually use the amenity spaces, the playground, etc. I just again want to note that that is absolutely watertight and that they have got the legal agreement on that.
Thank you. No, that's clear. No, so it hasn't changed from the previous application. There just was a lack of clarification, and officers weren't able to give a really sort of clear steer on it at the time. But as part of what the applicant has done coming forward with a lot more information, they have confirmed to me that they have, as part of their contractual arrangement with Crest Nicholson, that the future occupiers, were this to be permitted, do have access to those areas. Thank you.
Councillor Rivers, there was one here at our last meeting, I think.
Yes, yes, I remember this well. It seems to me that the design of this proposed building is a great deal better than the one that could be built, and there is additional planting and the little bits of landscaping around the car parking, so better than the one that could be built. If we were to refuse this in favour of the one that has permission and could be built because of the in theory, community building and commercial space. We know that commercial space is becoming residential space, and the community use, which would have been a nursery, the nursery has been resited. So I think that as we all recognise that Waverley needs housing, homes, I would be in favour of voting in favour of the homes rather than the theoretical commercial and community use.
Councillor Rubini.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of quick points. On page 97, where they talk about the alteration design, what's the soldier course? I haven't come across the term. Can you explain what soldier courses are?
Thank you. So bricks kind of that way. So thank you.
Second question, is there any relationship between the affordable homes here and the ones within the bigger site? I mean, for example, you could say that perhaps the bigger site relies on some affordable here. Because I wasn't at the first one, I couldn't ask the question then, but is there any relationship between these and the bigger site?
Thank you. So I guess when the original application was considered, the 2021, which was the reserve matters, that secured its affordable housing for that part of the development. And as part of that, the community building was put forward. So this is additional affordable housing over and above what the wider site is legally obliged to provide. Thank you.
So that percentage is now a very good percentage, presumably, when you consider the whole site rather than just a small one. Because obviously I'm very much in favour of the affordability of it.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you.
Councillor Crowe.
Thank you, Chair. So obviously I wasn't here for the November debate on the first plan, but I'm absolutely delighted to see that we're considering 12 social housing units, which we desperately need. So I think it'll certainly have my support.
Anybody else wish to speak? Oh, Councillor Cook.
Sorry, Chairman, I thought we were still on questions. I just want to agree with most people who have spoken anyway, but I thought the office block was pretty sort of bog standard and not particularly aesthetically pleasing. But I mean, if they could go and build that and then 2 years down the line turn it into housing that isn't as good as what we can actually determine, then I don't think we've got a choice in this, to be honest. I think what they've done, yes, it's still not wildly inspiring, but it is softer, it is more interesting to look at, and we need the homes, and I think they're well, we all know where it is. We went on so many site visits, I seem to recall, and walked around the lake and into the trees and everywhere else when we had the original one in. So, you know, it'd be nice to see this built out. And I think this is a good use, a better use, because at the moment, commercial space is becoming available and changing all the time. And, you know, we're not in charge of it. So let's have something that we know is going to have a benefit rather than this, Councillor Rivers said, something that may or may not in the future. So I think this is a very good change. Thank you.
Any other councillors to speak? No? No? Okay. Well, we'll move to the to the recommendations, which I presume these are the recommendations. Just checking. The recommendation A, that subject to the applicant entering into appropriate legal agreement in 6 months of the date of the committee resolution to grant planning permission to secure the provision of 100% on-site affordable housing and subject to conditions permission be granted. And recommendation B, that in the event that the section 106 agreement is not completed within 6 months of the date of the resolution to grant permission be refused. Again, electronic voting, please. Unanimous. Okay, that application is granted. Right. Okay. Now, we've reached the end of tonight's agenda, but I would do wish to make a point that this was the last meeting, in fact, Philippa will be present with us, Beth will be present with us, and Kate will be present with us, because they're all moving on to pastures new, as is in fact also Ruth Dovey, and in fact Sally Busby as well. I'd like to place on I'd like to record my personal appreciation. I'm sure everybody else here would like to appreciate all the efforts that these people have done in the past. So it's our loss, but I wish you all well in your future careers. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Chair, just to confirm, the recommendation was carried with a majority vote.